What's up guys, it's been about 2 weeks now with the new 14-inch MacBook Pro M1 base model, and I've been thoroughly impressed by it and what it's capable of considering it's only the base model. And I already put up my first impressions video when I first got it, and I really only covered the performance in editing with like DaVinci Resolve and Premiere Pro. I just wanted to see what the hype was. I wanted to see if it was real, and it really is. So this video could be long. It's going to be more of an in-depth review because I've had more time with it. I didn't even talk about the rest of the system in the last video, like the battery life, the new keyboard, the amazing screen, and what the true performance of this thing can actually do and what it also can't do. First off, not only has this machine hammered through all the work I've thrown at it the last couple weeks, but I've also brought it with me on some jobs as well. We used it on set for a DIT, transferring 6K red raw Komodo files off a CFast 2 card to SSD. It was really fast. And then I also asked the director to play back some of those 6K files in Red Cine X, and it was playing back smoothly with the LUT on it at half quality. And that's actually really impressive for a laptop that doesn't have some kind of traditional discrete graphics card. But this leads me into battery life, which has been very impressive depending on what you're doing. Because sometimes I was like, wow, you know, this battery life is amazing, to wow, this battery life is not that great. And when I was doing general stuff like web browsing, watching YouTube, it literally ran all day. I'd say close to like 9 to 10 hours, which is great. It's still not close to what Apple's claiming it can do, but obviously there's gonna be some variables there. When I was editing and Resolve 4K projects, I was getting close to 4.5 hours, which is still pretty good considering I'm also working off an external Thunderbolt drive. But as I mentioned earlier, we were using it to dump cards on set using a CFast card reader to 2 SSDs, and it was draining the battery really fast, and I was actually shocked at how fast it died. It only lasted around 3.5 hours, and then I had to plug it in. Another impressive real-world test I had was shooting an interview, and the director and people involved in the shoot couldn't be on set. They actually had to be on a Zoom call, and I piped over a live feed from the camera through an Elgato HDMI capture card, sending that into Zoom, and it ran all morning off the battery for like 4 hours, and it only dipped to 65%. So if you're doing Zoom calls, it's actually really impressive. So all that said, I guess it really just depends on what you're doing and how that battery is going to perform in that task. So when it comes to the display, the Liquid Retina XDR mini LED display, it's top tier. It's probably one of the best displays I've ever seen, at least that I've personally ever used. And that resolution is 3024 by 1964, so it's not quite 4K, but it's close to 4K. It's got adaptive refresh rate tech, so similar to what the iPads have, the Pro Motion. It can run up to 120 Hertz. Everything's smooth and responsive in the OS, but you will notice some apps only run at 60 Hertz. It's also nice and bright with an amazing contrast ratio. The blacks are super black. It's almost like an OLED. I compared this next to my 2019 15-inch MacBook Pro, which I thought also had a good display, but it made it look like trash. When editing photos, I love this display. It gave me accurate, vibrant, Apple calibrated colors. It's also been awesome to work from, even though I don't love editing photos on smaller screens, but this display makes it worthwhile. So the monitor behind me is really nice, and a lot of you have asked me what model it is. It's a 32-inch Thunderbolt 4K Ultrafine from LG. It's gonna be linked in the description if you wanna check it out. It's obviously a nice monitor. I've had it for a while now, and it's perfectly calibrated to the M1 Mac, and they look really, really close when it comes to color, but not when it comes to contrast and viewing like HDR content. That's where the MacBook shines. But I actually find that the MacBook display isn't crazy bright. It's bright, but when it's at its highest setting, I wouldn't say that it's any brighter than like my iPad Pro. And it gets really bright though when you're watching HDR content, and that's where Apple cranks the nits up to that legit HDR experience. And it's kind of misleading when you see 1000 nits to 1600 nits peak brightness. They're obviously talking about HDR content, which is gonna be rare in day-to-day tasks. So I know this is gonna sound kind of newbie for a tech person, but I've never really used a true HDR display before. I thought this LG monitor is HDR, but it's not like a true 1000 nit HDR. So the first time I noticed some footage I shot on my Sony ZV-1 shooting HLG, makes the camera look so much better than I could have imagined, and I just wasn't expecting that. And I kind of wish that everyone could have a display like this to experience it. When it comes to the overall new design of the 14-inch MacBook, Apple obviously went thicker, the body's the thicker design, and they dropped some actual usable ports in there. So now we've got MagSafe for charging, as well as it's got 3 Thunderbolt USB 4 ports, as well as HDMI 2.0 and a UHS 2 card reader, which has been amazing. Not needing a dongle for that is so good. What's also cool is that you can also charge the MacBook through USB-C if you needed to, other than using the MagSafe. The new keyboard is very nice. It's all black. I kind of like this design. It's similar to the new iPad Magic Keyboard, and it feels pretty good. Gone are the days of the faulty butterfly keyboard, so I guess we'll see how this one holds up. But it's just a keyboard. It's maybe not my favorite. It's nice, but they're never gonna bring back that nice PowerBook G5 keyboard. That's probably the best it gets. As you all know by now, Apple's added that notch in the top of the display. I got over it pretty quick. I don't really see it anymore. It could get in the way if you had a menu bar with a lot of items and some apps aren't updated for it. It does seem kind of unnecessary just for a webcam, but I guess that's how Apple does things. So this is the new webcam. It looks all right. I mean, I'm using it in good lighting, so it's gonna look good. But let's go into some low light. So here I am in low light. This is what most people are gonna probably be in, and it doesn't look any better than the 720p camera that was on the old MacBook probably. The speakers are also really nice. I don't know how Apple was able to come up with that much bass, get a nice clean mid-range sound out of it, and I used to think that my 15-inch MacBook Pro speakers were good, but these are way better, and I think a good way to show that is just to compare them. Not only are the speakers amazing, but so is the mic built into this laptop. You're hearing what it sounds like right now, and you could almost get away with using this instead of an external mic. You could just use the mic built into the laptop and get this type of quality out of it. So I noticed a lot of comments on the last video asking me why I always do video editing tests in these MacBook reviews. And the reason for that is because that's probably the most obvious stress test you're going to put on a system. If it can handle all these high bitrate video files and run them smooth as well as export fast, then you know it's got some serious horsepower, and then it's probably going to be able to do anything else easily. So that said, I know there's obviously some people out there that do 3D rendering and other people that use some intense software, but I'm pretty sure you guys know that you need the 16-inch M1 Max over this base model M1 Pro, so I don't know why you're asking that. But that also brings me back to the performance side of things before I wrap up this video. Clearly, it's capable of a lot, and I showed that in the last video, editing in Resolve and Premiere. I didn't show Final Cut because we all know by now that Final Cut runs everything amazing. That said, Resolve has caught up. It's fast and smooth now, and it's great to see the improvements on this M1 architecture. It can handle 4K H.265, ProRes, H.264 all day super smooth. Anything I was throwing at it, 60p, 120p, 4K, 10-bit. And that's why I said the base model 14-inch MacBook is all you really need. And it's going to be more than enough for every YouTube content creator, filmmaker working with these types of files. But all that said, it's not perfect. I did find its limitations, and the limitations make sense. You're not going to be using a 14-inch MacBook Pro to be working with red RAW files every day. So working with 6K, 8K, even like Blackmagic 12K files, it could handle them at half or a quarter quality in the timeline with just some simple color grading, but when you start to add more nodes and effects, that's where it's going to crush it, and you're going to see the limitations of the smaller CPU and GPU cores. So I had my buddy Phil come over with his maxed out 16-inch M1 MacBook Pro, and we loaded it up with the same 6K Red RAW music video that I did some tests with, and check that out. So I've got some 6K Red RAW footage running here with just one node. It's running perfect on the 14-inch MacBook Pro. When I added a second node with noise reduction, it started lagging out, and I had to lower the quality down to quarter resolution. When I did that, it actually plays back perfectly at 24 frames per second. This is where I wanted to add some more things, so I added a tracking node where we could add some masking to his face, and then we added a fourth node here with some more color grading, and it still plays back pretty good, 24 frames per second, no problem. And that's with 4 nodes right now on 6K footage. I doubled up the clip with the same amount of nodes, and that's when I brought this thing to its knees. It could hardly play it back. And when I put it to a quarter resolution, still it was around 12 to 15 frames per second. It just jumped all over the place. Then I loaded the exact same test up on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. I started adding more nodes, some more tracking stuff, and it was playing back no problem, handling it really easily. And then when I turned the playback to off, which is just full quality, that's when I saw that it couldn't play it back. So it can't play it back in full quality, but if you put it to half resolution, this thing's just gonna crank out no problem. Then I wanted to see what would happen if I doubled up the clips. The second clip only has 5 nodes on it, but it has 2 noise reduction nodes, and it was playing back this pretty smooth. It's still not 24 frames per second, but it's not that bad. Then I did a render test exporting this exact project on both systems, and this is where paying the extra money for the 16-inch MacBook Pro fully maxed out might make sense to some of you, because it finished this export in almost 2.5 times faster than the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I was impressed by how fast it went. But I noticed that the fans came on the 16-inch MacBook Pro where the fans didn't come on the 14-inch MacBook Pro, so that's something to think about as well. So that almost kind of shows you how things scale if you wanted to drop some serious money on a 16-inch MacBook Pro and you need that power. Then you know what you got to do. You got to drain that bank account, because that's the only way you're going to get that thing. I think that for all YouTube content editing, 4K, even 10-bit footage, the base model is going to be all you're ever going to need. And I haven't even mentioned the RAM yet. The base model is only 16 gigs, and I found that it wasn't really an issue for anything I was doing day to day. I'm talking like full 4K 10-bit projects with like 300 gigs of footage, Resolve open, Photoshop open at the same time with like 20 to 30 raw photos, layers and edits, Spotify, Safari open with a few tabs. I never once felt the system get slow or lag out on me. I think it's just the new architecture and how it swaps the RAM with the SSD when it's low. That said, I would recommend more RAM if you need it, but I found on day-to-day stuff it was totally fine. So it was only when it came to 6K and 8K raw footage where the base model wouldn't really cut it for me personally, which makes sense. It's not made for that, but it's also fun to see if it can do it, and it can kind of do it. But if you want the best experience editing things without creating proxies, I think for that reason, you'd want to go for something more like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, or put the highest end M1 Max chip in the 14-inch. The display is amazing, the speakers are amazing, the overall features you get with this is unbeatable. And I think that if you're looking to upgrade right now, it's probably the best time. The older Intel systems are going to have lost a lot of resale value at this point, where these M1 systems won't. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, give it a thumbs down twice. Don't forget to hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one.